Shows are done. I'm gonna have to tell the colonel I can't do this no more.
At 91 years old, his hands shake from the weight of a 70-year-old secret. This isn't a Hollywood producer or a greedy insider. This is the childhood pastor who knew Elvis Presley before the fame, the sequins, and the screaming crowds. Breaking down in tears, he finally confesses, "Elvis made me a promise, and he kept it, until the night he couldn't." Why did this holy man guard Elvis's final, heartbreaking secret for nearly 7 decades? What the king of rock and roll confessed right before leaving Memphis will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about him. The man nobody talks about, his name is Reverend Charles Monroe Bodine. Most people have never heard of him. That's exactly how he wanted it. For nearly 7 decades, he lived quietly in a small house outside Tupelo, Mississippi. Same town where Elvis Aaron Presley was born. Same county where a skinny, wide-eyed boy used to sit in the front pew of a tiny Assembly of God church every Sunday morning without fail. Reverend Bodine was that church's junior pastor back in the late 1940s. He was 23 years old, fresh out of seminary, nervous most of the time, and completely unprepared for the boy who would walk through those church doors and change the course of his life. He didn't know that yet, of course. Nobody did. The church itself was nothing fancy. Wooden floors, narrow windows. A congregation that was mostly poor, struggling, and holding on to faith because there wasn't much else to hold on to in Tupelo back then. This was the deep South after the war. Money was tight. Jobs were scarce. Families like the Presleys were just trying to survive week to week. Vernon Presley worked whatever he could find. Gladys Presley held the family together with both hands. And their son, Elvis, sat in that church every week and soaked in everything. The music, the sermons, the feeling of something bigger than the hard life outside those wooden doors. Reverend Bodine noticed him early, not because Elvis was louder than the other kids. Actually, the opposite. He was quieter than you'd expect, watchful. He'd sit there and listen to the gospel singers like he was memorizing every breath they took. That boy heard music differently than anyone I'd ever seen, Bodine said in a recent recorded interview. He didn't just listen, he felt it somewhere deep. You could see it on his face. The Presley family left Tupelo in 1948. Elvis was 13 years old. They packed what little they had into a borrowed truck and drove to Memphis, chasing the faint hope of better work, better wages, a better life. It was a move that would eventually reshape American music forever. But at that moment, it was just a poor family leaving a poor town. Before they left, Elvis came to the church one last time. Not on a Sunday, a Tuesday afternoon. The building was empty. Reverend Bodine was inside, preparing his notes for the following week's sermon when the door opened. Elvis stood in the doorway, 13 years old, holding his worn Bible under his arm. He asked if he could talk. They sat together in that empty church for nearly 2 hours. What was said in that conversation has stayed locked inside Reverend Bodine for 76 years. Until now. People who study Elvis closely, the real researchers, the ones who go beyond the mythology, they'll tell you that his church roots were not incidental. They were foundational. Elvis did not pick up gospel music as a career strategy. He grew up soaking in it. It shaped how he heard sound, how he felt rhythm, how he understood performance as something almost spiritual. And Reverend Bodine was one of the people who planted those seeds. He wasn't just a pastor to young Elvis. He was a teacher, a sounding board, a man who took the boy seriously at a time when the world had no particular reason to. Elvis would ask me questions after service, Bodine recalled. Deep questions about God, purpose, and whether a person could want something so badly that it scared them. That last part is important, because what most people don't know about the young Elvis Presley is that alongside all that desire and all that talent, there was a very real fear. Fear of failure, fear of becoming nothing, fear of letting his mother down. Gladys Presley had sacrificed everything for that boy. Elvis knew it. He felt the weight of it every single day. And Reverend Bodine was one of the few people he ever spoke to about it, honestly. So, why has this man been invisible for so long? Elvis Presley is one of the most written about human beings who ever lived. Thousands of books, hundreds of documentaries, interviews with managers, musicians, lovers, bodyguards, cooks, and distant cousins. And yet somehow, this man, the the pastor who knew Elvis as a child, who sat with him in an empty church the week before he left for Memphis. Somehow, he never made it into the story. Part of that was deliberate. Reverend Bodine made a choice early on to stay out of it. When Elvis got famous, the requests started coming. Journalists, biographers. A television producer in 1963 who showed up at his door unannounced and offered him money for his story. He turned every one of them down. "Elvis trusted me with something private," he said simply. "That wasn't mine to sell." That one sentence explained everything about this man. He is not someone who trades on proximity to greatness. He never was. While others who crossed paths with Elvis were writing memoirs and cashing checks, Reverend Bodine was quietly doing what he'd always done. Pastoring, praying, keeping a promise of his own. He is 91 years old now. His eyesight is going. He moves slowly. He tires easily. But his memory of Elvis Presley is startlingly sharp. He remembers the color of the shirt Elvis wore that Tuesday afternoon. He remembers which hymn was still echoing in his head from rehearsal when the door opened. He remembers the exact words Elvis said when he finally got to the point of why he came. Those words are coming. But first, you need to understand who Elvis was before Memphis, before Sun Records, before any of it. Because the promise Elvis made in that church only makes sense when you understand the boy who made it. And that boy, scared, gifted, desperate to become something, is a version of Elvis the world almost never sees. The boy before, the king. Elvis Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in a two-room house his father built with borrowed money and his own two hands in East Tupelo, Mississippi. The house was 30 feet long, no indoor plumbing, no insulation. In winter, the wind came right through the walls. Vernon Presley had scraped together $180 to build it. He didn't have that kind of money. He borrowed some. He owed some. The debt followed the family for years. That is the world Elvis came into. Not poverty as a backdrop. Poverty as a daily, grinding, inescapable reality. It was supposed to be two of them. Elvis had a twin brother, Jesse Garon Presley, born the same night, January 8, 1935. Jesse was stillborn. Gladys Presley nearly died that night too. She survived, but something in her never fully recovered from losing that baby. She wrapped every ounce of that grief around Elvis. Every fear she'd ever had about losing him too got poured into how tightly she held on. Elvis grew up as an only child, carrying the weight of a ghost. His mother called him her miracle. She meant it literally. And Elvis, even as a very small boy, understood that his survival meant something to her that went beyond ordinary motherly love. He was the one who lived. That shaped him in ways that ran bone deep. The church came early. Gladys was devout. She had been raised Pentecostal, and she brought Elvis into that world before he could fully walk. The First Assembly of God in Tupelo was not a quiet, formal kind of church. Services were loud, emotional, full of shouting and weeping and music that grabbed you by the collar.
You see, country music was always a part of the influence on my type of music anyway. It's a combination of
Elvis sat in those pews and watched grown men and women surrender completely to something invisible. He watched the choir singers close their eyes and go somewhere else entirely. That image stayed with him. Reverend Bodine, who was leading youth services by the time Elvis was 10 or 11, noticed something specific about the boy. Not just that he loved music. Plenty of kids loved music. It was how he responded to the singers who were truly feeling it versus the ones just going through the motions.
country music and gospel and rhythm and blues all combined is what it really was. As a child, I was influenced by all of that.
Elvis could tell the difference every time, Bodine recalled. If somebody was faking it, he'd sit back. If somebody was really in it, he'd lean forward. He was grading them at 10 years old. School was not Elvis's place. He was not a bad student. He was not a troublemaker. He just didn't belong there in the way some kids seem to slot right in.
Yes, sir, that's right. And I like to say let's see, what would I like to say?
He was awkward, quiet in the wrong moments, intense in others. He dressed differently from the other boys, not because he was trying to stand out. The Presleys couldn't afford the standard wardrobe, so Gladys bought what she could find. and what she could find was often mismatched and secondhand. Kids noticed there was bullying, not dramatic movie-style cruelty, the quieter, meaner kind, being left out, being laughed at, being the boy that other boys didn't include. Elvis came to Reverend Bodine about it once. He didn't come crying, he came confused, genuinely trying to understand what he was doing wrong. Bodine told him he wasn't doing anything wrong, that some people sense something different in others and their first instinct is to push it away. Elvis sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "You think I'm different?" Bodine said yes, without hesitating. Elvis nodded slowly. He didn't look upset. He looked like someone had finally confirmed something he already suspected. The guitar came when Elvis was 11. The story most people know is that he wanted a bicycle for his birthday and got a guitar instead. That's partially true. Gladys couldn't afford the bicycle. She bought the guitar from the Tupelo Hardware Company for just under $13. Elvis was disappointed at first, but within weeks he barely put it down.
I liked all different types of music when I was a child, you know. Of course, the Grand Ole Opry was the first thing I ever heard, probably. But I liked blues and I liked the gospel music.
He learned from watching, from listening. He'd hear something on the radio, gospel, country, the blues drifting out of black neighborhoods nearby. And he'd go home and try to find it on those 6 strings by feel. Nobody taught him formally. He taught himself. And what came out was already something that didn't fit neatly into any category.
Did you ever pull out any of those old records from the Sun label and listen to them at all?
They sound funny, boy.
Reverend Bodine heard him play for the first time in the church hall one afternoon. Elvis didn't know anyone was listening. He was alone, working through a gospel melody he'd been trying to figure out, bending the notes in a way that wasn't quite traditional. Bodine stood in the doorway and listened for several minutes without saying anything. It was like hearing 2 or 3 different kinds of music happening at the same time, he said. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Lord, it did. By the time Elvis was 12, 13, the family situation in Tupelo had gotten worse instead of better. Vernon had served time in prison years earlier, a forgery conviction that branded the family in a small town where everyone knew everyone. Work was hard to find. Money was always short. The little house on Kelly Street that they had moved to felt more like a trap than a home. Memphis started coming up in conversations. Other families from Tupelo had made the move. Some of them sent word back that there were factory jobs, packing houses, more opportunity, or at least the possibility of it. Vernon started talking about it seriously in 1947. By 1948, it was decided they were leaving. For Elvis, that news landed in 2 different ways at once. Part of him was ready. He felt the ceiling in Tupelo. He felt how small the world was there for someone like him. Memphis was just over 100 miles north, but in his imagination, it might as well have been another planet. And part of him was terrified, because everything he knew, the church, the music, Reverend Bodine, the pew he'd sat in since he was a toddler, all of that was staying behind. He was 13 years old, about to step into a city 10 times bigger than anything he'd ever known, with no connections, no money, no guarantee of anything. Just a guitar, a mother who believed in him with her whole heart, and a faith he'd absorbed through the wooden floors of a Pentecostal church in rural Mississippi. And before he left, he needed to see someone. He needed to say something he'd never said out loud before. He needed to make a promise. The night before Memphis. It was a Tuesday, late September 1948. The Presley family was leaving Tupelo in 2 days. The truck was already half packed. Most of their furniture had been sold or given away. The house on Berry Street looked hollow, walls bare, floors empty. Gladys had been crying on and off for a week. Vernon was holding it together the way he always did, by not talking about it much. And Elvis disappeared for the afternoon. Nobody in the family knew exactly where he went. He told his mother he was going to say goodbye to some people. That was true, but there was one goodbye that mattered more than all the others combined. He walked to the church. Reverend Bodine was inside when he heard the door. He'd been there since mid-morning, working through his notes for Sunday's sermon. The church was empty and cool. Late afternoon light was coming through the narrow windows at a low angle, throwing long shadows across the wooden floor. Then the door opened. Bodine looked up. Elvis stood in the entrance, 13 years old. his good shirt on. The blue one Gladys kept pressed for important occasions. His hair already combed back in that particular way he'd started wearing it. He was holding his Bible, not carrying it casually, holding it, both hands, like he'd brought it on purpose. Bodine said later that he knew immediately this wasn't a casual visit. Something in the boy's posture told him, something deliberate about the way Elvis walked in and sat down in the front pew without being asked. He looked like someone who had rehearsed what they were going to say, Bodine recalled, but then got there and forgot how to start. So Bodine waited. He closed his notes, he sat down, and he waited. It took Elvis a few minutes to get there. He talked around at first, asked about the congregation, asked whether the choir was going to keep doing the extended gospel nights on Fridays. Small questions filling space. Bodine let him. Then Elvis got quiet. He looked down at the Bible in his hands, turned it over once, set it on the pew beside him, and then he said it. "I think God put something in me. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I think it's supposed to go somewhere." Bodine didn't respond immediately. He said later he was struck by the precision of it. Not, "I want to be famous," not, "I want to make music." Something put in me that's supposed to go somewhere. That was theological language. That was a boy framing his own talent as a calling rather than a choice. "I asked him what he thought it was," Bodine said, "and he looked at me very directly and said, 'I think it's the music, but I'm scared I'll waste it.'" Let that land for a second. 13 years old, about to leave the only home he'd ever known. And what's keeping him up at night isn't whether Memphis will be scary, or whether he'll make friends, or whether his father will find work. It's the fear of wasting what God gave him. That tells you everything about who Elvis Presley was before the world got hold of him. They talked for a long time that afternoon. Bodine asked Elvis what wasting it would look like to him. Elvis thought about that carefully. Then he said, "Getting too comfortable. Singing just to make people happy instead of because it means something. Forgetting where it came from." Bodine said that answer surprised him, because most boys that age, if they had Elvis's raw talent and someone told them they were special, they'd be thinking about applause, about attention, about getting out of poverty and never going back. Elvis was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about integrity, about staying true to something he couldn't fully name yet, but knew was real. He had a reverence for it, Bodine said, for the gift itself. He didn't want to cheapen it. Then came the promise. Elvis picked up the Bible again. He held it in his lap. He told Reverend Bodine that he needed to say something out loud to someone who would remember it, someone who would hold him to it. He said, "I promise that no matter what happens in Memphis, no matter how far I go, I will never forget that this music came from God. I won't use it for things that don't matter, and I won't let it make me into someone my mama would be ashamed of." He said it slowly, clearly, looking directly at Bodine the whole time. Not emotional, not dramatic, just certain. Bodine sat with that for a moment. Then he asked Elvis if he wanted him to pray over that promise. Elvis said yes. They both bowed their heads in that empty church. Late afternoon, long shadows on the wooden floor. And Reverend Charles Monroe Bodine prayed over a 13-year-old boy who had no idea what was coming. Neither of them did. After the prayer, Elvis stood up. He straightened his shirt, picked up his Bible. He shook Reverend Bodine's hand, a formal gesture, almost adult, and thanked him. Then he walked toward the door. He stopped once, just before he reached it. Without turning around, he said, "I'll make you proud, Reverend." And then he was gone. Bodine sat in that church for a long time after Elvis left. He said he didn't fully understand why the visit had hit him so hard. The boy was 13. Kids say things. Kids make promises they forget by the following week. But something told him this was different. "I believed him," Bodine said simply. "I don't know how to explain it better than that. I just believed him." The Presley family left for Memphis 2 days later, November 6th, 1948. They arrived with almost nothing, checked into a rooming house on Poplar Avenue. Vernon eventually found work. Gladys took in sewing. Elvis enrolled at L.C. Humes High School, where he was, once again, the quiet boy that nobody paid much attention to. For a while, it seemed like Tupelo had swallowed everything up, like the church, the music, the promise. All of it had been left behind on that road out of Mississippi. It hadn't. 5 years later, Elvis Presley walked into Sun Studio on Union Avenue and recorded his first song. Within a year, the world would never be the same. And Reverend Bodine, sitting in his small house back in Tupelo, heard it on the radio one evening. He recognized it immediately. Not just the voice, the reverence.
Close it all right. I gotta walk way over town street.
What the promise actually meant. Most people think they know the Elvis story. Poor boy from Mississippi. Discovers rock and roll, becomes the biggest star on the planet, gets rich, gets famous, gets lost somewhere, inside all of it. Dies too young in a mansion in Memphis. That's the shorthand version. And like most shorthand versions, it leaves out the part that actually explains everything. The promise Elvis made in that church was not a sentimental goodbye gesture from a nervous kid. It was a contract with himself, with God, with the music. And when you look at his life through that lens, things start to make a different kind of sense.
They asked me to do it, and I was anxious to do some live appearances. You know, it'd been a long time since I've been on stage in front of anybody live.
When Elvis walked into Sun Studio in the summer of 1954, he was 19 years old and largely unknown. Sam Phillips, the man running the studio, had been looking for something specific. He famously said he was searching for a white artist who could sing with the feeling of black music without it being imitation. Elvis didn't arrive with a strategy. He didn't arrive with a calculated sound designed to fill that gap. He arrived with everything he'd absorbed since childhood. Gospel from the Assembly of God Church. The blues he'd heard drifting through Tupelo's black neighborhoods as a boy. Country music from the radio in whatever house the Presleys were renting that year. It all came out at once. The first real take that stopped everyone in that studio was a loose, almost accidental version of Arthur Crudup's "That's All Right." Elvis started playing it between takes, goofing around, not performing, just feeling it. Phillips heard it from the control room and came straight out. "What are you doing?" he asked. Elvis said he didn't know. Phillips said, "Well, back up and do it again." That moment, unplanned, unforced, just a young man playing something that felt true. That is the promise in action, not performing for approval, playing because it meant something. Reverend Bodine followed Elvis's career from a careful distance. He didn't seek him out. He didn't write letters or show up at concerts. He watched from Tupelo the same way millions of others did, through newspapers, radio, eventually television. But he was watching for something specific. He was watching to see whether the boy kept his word. The first real test, in Bodine's view, came in 1956. Elvis was already enormous by then. Heartbreak Hotel went to #1. The Ed Sullivan appearances had made him a national obsession. He was being called dangerous, immoral, a corrupting influence on American youth. Preachers across the country were condemning him from their pulpits. And here is what Elvis did in the middle of all that noise. He recorded "Peace in the Valley," a gospel hymn. Traditional, reverent, completely stripped of any attempt to be commercial or current. He recorded it because he wanted to, because it meant something to him, because his mother loved gospel music and he wanted to give her something that came from that place. Nobody told him to. His management at the time wasn't pushing gospel. It wasn't an obvious career move. He did it anyway.
Without a song, a man ain't got a friend. Without a song, the road will never bend. Without a song. So I'll keep singing a song.
When Bodine heard it on the radio, he said he sat very still for a long time afterward. That was the promise, he said. Right there. That was the boy keeping his word. But the promise was also tested in darker ways. Fame at that scale does things to a person. Things that are hard to explain unless you've lived inside it. By the early 1960s, Elvis had been pulled into Hollywood. Movie contract after movie contract. Formulaic films with lightweight soundtracks designed to sell records rather than mean anything. He hated it. That's not a revisionist take. People around him during that period have said it consistently for decades. Elvis felt trapped. He knew the movies were beneath what he could do. He knew the music being written for them was thin. He said so privately, often, with real frustration. There's an account from a recording session in 1963 where Elvis stopped in the middle of a song, put down his headphones, and said quietly to no one in particular, "This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing." Nobody responded. They picked up and kept recording. That moment, that quiet statement of grief in a professional setting where speaking honestly cost him something. That is the promise straining under pressure. He hadn't abandoned it, but he could feel how far he drifted from it.
Well, I think the overall thing has improved. The overall sound's improved, I mean. But I think it...
Reverend Bodine speaks about this period carefully. He doesn't condemn Elvis for it. He doesn't frame it as failure. He frames it as what happens when the world gets louder than the thing inside you. He was surrounded by people who needed him to keep making money, Bodine said. That's a hard thing to fight when you're the one everybody depends on.
And it has 14 diamonds in it, and we're going to give it away at the door as a door prize.
I see.
And everything.
And all the...
Elvis was supporting his parents, his extended family, an expanding circle of friends and associates who had attached themselves to his success. The financial pressure was real and constant. Saying no to the movies meant saying no to all of that. So he didn't say no, but he also didn't let go of the music that mattered to him. Not completely. Throughout the 60s, no matter how many lightweight soundtracks he recorded, he kept coming back to gospel. He recorded 3 full gospel albums across his career, won 3 Grammy Awards.
I saw movies and I was the hero in the movie. So every dream that I ever dreamed has come true 100 times.
All 3 were for gospel music. Not rock and roll, not pop. Gospel. The only Grammys Elvis Presley ever won were for the music he learned in a wooden church in Tupelo, Mississippi. If that isn't the promise keeping itself alive, nothing is. Then came 1968, the comeback special. Elvis hadn't performed live in nearly a decade. He was 33 years old. Some people had genuinely started to wonder whether the moment had passed, whether he was finished. He sat down in front of a small live audience in a black leather suit and played like a man who had been waiting years to remember who he was. No movie, no script, no formula. Just Elvis and a guitar and the music he actually believed in. The performance is still talked about today as one of the greatest moments in American entertainment history.
I just do whatever I feel on stage, you know. As I always did that.
Are you going to keep making films?
Reverend Bodine watched it on television. He said he recognized it immediately. The same quality he'd heard in that church hall in Tupelo when Elvis was playing alone and didn't know anyone was listening. The reverence, the realness. He came back to himself that night, Bodine said. Whatever had pulled him away from it, he came back. That is what the promise actually meant. Not perfection, not a straight unbroken line from that Tuesday afternoon in Tupelo to some ideal version of Elvis that never got compromised or lost. It meant something to return to, a fixed point, a true north. When everything else got noisy and commercial and confusing, the promise was still there, waiting. The music that came from somewhere real. The commitment to not let it become something empty. Elvis didn't keep the promise every single day of his life. Nobody could, but he kept coming back to it. And maybe that's what keeping a promise actually looks like across a whole lifetime. Not never straying, just never fully letting go. Decades of silence. And why now? Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. He was 42 years old. Reverend Bodine heard the news on the radio. He was in his kitchen in Tupelo, making coffee, when the announcement came through. He sat down at the table and didn't move for a long time. He wasn't crying yet. He said he just felt the weight of it settle over him slowly, like the room had changed temperature. By the time the evening came, the phone was ringing. Neighbors, people from the congregation, journalists who had somehow tracked down his number after learning he'd known Elvis as a child. He didn't answer a single call. He sat in that kitchen. He prayed, and he made a decision that he would keep for the next 47 years. He was not going to talk about it. To understand why, you need to know what the weeks after Elvis's death actually looked like from the outside. It was chaos. Every person who had ever spent 10 minutes near Elvis Presley was suddenly a source. Former employees, distant relatives, people who had met him once at a party in 1961. All of them talking, all of them with a story to sell.
Elvis, folks are saying you came out of nowhere this past year. How does it feel to have things happen so fast?
Well, sir, it feels mighty good, but it still kind of surprised me. I was just singing down in Memphis.
Books appeared within months. Some of them were thoughtful. Many of them were not. Tabloids ran headlines that would have humiliated Elvis in life. His final years were dissected publicly in ways that were often cruel and almost always reductive. Bodine watched all of it from Tupelo, and the more he watched, the more certain he became. The conversation in that church was not for public consumption. Elvis had come to him privately, trusted him privately. What passed between them in that empty building on a Tuesday afternoon in 1948 belonged to the two of them and nobody else. Selling that story, even telling it, felt like a betrayal. So he didn't. The requests kept coming over the years. 1982, a biographer working on what he described as the definitive account of Elvis's religious life showed up in Tupelo and tracked Bodine down through the church registry. He drove out to the house unannounced, knocked on the door, introduced himself, and explained why he was there. Bodine invited him in for coffee, let him talk for 20 minutes, then told him, politely and without anger, that he had nothing to share. The biographer pushed back gently, said this was history, said people deserved to know the real Elvis, the spiritual Elvis, not just the caricature. Bodine said he agreed completely. Then he showed the man to the door. I wasn't trying to protect the legend, Bodine explained recently. I wasn't protecting Elvis Presley the icon. I was protecting a 13-year-old boy who trusted me. Those are two different things. 1994, a television production company called. They were making a documentary about Elvis's gospel roots and wanted first-hand accounts from people who knew him before Memphis. Same answer. No. 2003. An author writing specifically about the Tupelo years reached him through a mutual contact and sent a letter asking for a recorded interview, handwritten, respectful. Acknowledging up front that Bodine had always declined, Bodine wrote back, also by hand. He thanked the man for his courtesy, told him his research sounded thorough and worthwhile, and declined. His own congregation knew almost nothing about any of this. That might be the most remarkable part. Reverend Bodine spent decades pastoring churches in and around the Tupelo area. His congregations knew he was local. They knew he was old enough to have been around during Elvis's early years. Some of them probably knew he'd attended the same church as the Presley family. But he never brought it up from the pulpit, never referenced it in sermons, never used the connection to draw attention to himself or to fill seats on a slow Sunday. One of his longtime church members, a woman named Dorothy Haskins, who attended his services for over 30 years, said she only found out about the depth of his relationship with Elvis 2 years ago. He mentioned it almost in passing, she recalled. Something came up in a sermon about keeping your word, and he said he'd once known someone who made a very serious promise as a young boy. I asked him afterward who he meant. He smiled and told me. I couldn't believe it. 30 years and he'd never said a word. That is the man we are talking about. So what changed? Why, after 47 years of silence, is Reverend Charles Monroe Bodine speaking now? The answer is simpler than you might expect, and more human. He is 91 years old. His health is declining. His eyesight has deteriorated significantly over the past 2 years. He tires easily. His doctor has been honest with him about what the next chapter looks like. He started thinking about what happens to the story when he's gone, not in a vain way, not because he wants recognition or legacy, but because he began to feel that staying silent was no longer the right form of respect. I used to think keeping quiet was how I honored him, Bodine said. But I've been sitting with it a long time now, and I think I had it wrong. He paused at that point in the interview. Then he said, "The world knows a lot about Elvis Presley, but they don't know this, and I think they should, because it shows you who he really was before any of it happened." There was also something more specific that pushed him toward this decision. In the spring of 2024, Bodine's granddaughter sat him down to watch a recent documentary about Elvis, a well-produced, serious piece of work, detailed, thorough. Bodine watched it all the way through without saying much. When it finished, his granddaughter asked him what he thought. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's accurate, but it's missing something important." She asked what. He thought about how to answer. "It's missing the boy who made the promise," he said finally. "Everything else came from that, and nobody knows about it." She looked at him. "Then tell them, Grandpa." He didn't answer right away, but something shifted in him that evening. You could hear it in how he described the moment, like a decision that had been forming for years, finally found the last piece it needed. He agreed to the recorded interview 3 months later. He set one condition. He didn't want it sensationalized. He didn't want headlines that made it sound like a scandal or a secret or something dark. He wanted it told the way it actually was, a boy, a church, a promise. That's it. He said, Elvis deserves to be remembered as someone who started out with real intentions. Whatever happened later, whatever he struggled with, that was real. That was who he was at the beginning. And I was there. When the interview was recorded, there was a moment near the end where the interviewer asked Bodine directly, "Do you think Elvis kept the promise?" Bodine didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his hands, the ones that shake now, the ones that once rested on the shoulders of a 13-year-old boy in an empty church in Tupelo. Then he looked up. He kept it more than people know, he said, and then he wept. Not from grief exactly, from something that looked much more like gratitude.
When I was a child, ladies and gentlemen, I was a dreamer. I read comic books and I was the hero of the comic book.
Elvis Presley left Tupelo as a boy with nothing but a guitar and a promise. He became the most famous entertainer who ever lived. And through all of it, the fame, the pressure, the years he lost himself inside the machine, that promise never fully disappeared. Reverend Bodine kept his silence for 47 years out of pure respect. What he finally chose to share isn't a scandal. It isn't a secret that destroys the legend. It's the opposite. It's proof that before the world made Elvis into an icon, he was just a boy who wanted to do something meaningful with what God gave him, and he meant it. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more hidden stories behind the legend's history almost forgot.